Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. Before I get started, I want to say if you are interested in being a part of a Pan-Africanist and Black nationalist organization, we are starting a organization that will really be based off of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the organization originally founded by Malcolm X before his death. If you are interested in being a part of those efforts, I have a description, a link to the Facebook group in the description box, as well as my email address in the description box. You can email me directly. And also, if you are particularly interested in leadership, do let me know that that is what you're interested in doing. In addition, if you are someone that's interested in getting news updates about Pan-African issues around the world, we have a Facebook group called Pan-African News Press where we discuss different issues and we post news articles and news media articles on the group, basically to spread information and be our own 24-hour news cycle. So what we're going to talk about today is the unfortunate, expected death of Stephon Clark. And the reason I say expected is because at this point, I think that we would understand that our place in America is essentially the place of being a threat to white supremacy and being a threat to police officers whose job it is to uphold this system of white supremacy. Now, Stephon Clark, he's only 22 years old, but he was murdered in his backyard of his grandmother's home, shot 22 times by the police. They say that they believe that he had a gun, and the video does say them yelling, "Gun, gun." However, whenever they went to his body to examine him, he did not have a gun. He only had an iPhone. The first thing I thought about when I heard this story, of course, is mourning the loss of life. I always take it in whenever any of our Black brothers or sisters die, especially, when they're younger. They have their whole life ahead of them, and in his case, he had young children. So, of course, you have to reconcile that there is a loss of life that occurred. But the other thing that hit me hard is that this was someone that was just supposedly in their grandmother's backyard, not doing anything wrong. And just the fact that you're Black, just the fact that you're in the wrong place at the wrong time while you're Black, could essentially mean that you become a victim to police violence. And this is a hard reality that I think we have to grapple with. Any of us could have been him. Any of us could have been Trayvon Martin. Any of us could have been Tamir Rice. Any of us could have been Ayanna Jones. Any of us could have been Rakia Boyd. Any of us who have a pigment of skin that is perceived as a threat could have essentially been Stephon Clark. So understanding that, I think we can better understand what do we do about this. This idea that, well, if I am in the right place, I live in a good neighborhood, I have a good job, I take care of my family, I do all these things straight, I will not be a victim of this type of violence. We've seen over and over again that there were people who did the right thing, and this is a right thing according to the society we live in, but who did all the things that we're told to do, had gotten educations, and in the case of Philando Castile, got a gun permit, had a gun legally. There are people who follow the law to a T, and unfortunately, these same people have been victims of police violence. So we have to understand that this is not something that you can avoid. The fact that this happens to Stephon Clark has to arise inside of us, the fire of knowing that that could have been us, that could have been one of our children, it could have been one of our brothers and sisters, and because of that, we have to be motivated to figure something out and figure something out quickly. Now, the reaction has been, as has always been, and that is Black Lives Matters has come out, and they're saying Black Lives Matter. I don't know if it's them, but people are basically protesting all over the city there. And this is expected. Now, the question is, what's going to happen next? It's interesting. I was watching on CNN. They had Sunny Hostin, and she was giving her legal analysis of what she thinks is going to happen. And she basically straight out said she thinks that this is not going to be a case where the cops are probably charged, especially it's not going to be a case where the cops are actually convicted. And the reason being is because if you look at the video, they said gun, gun, and then they perceived there to be a gun, and they shot on that basis. And she says just the perception that the person had a gun is enough legally for you to basically avoid getting a conviction. Now, this should not be a surprise to us, because we've had numerous times whenever people only said, I feared for my life, or I thought he had a gun, I thought he had this, and I thought he had that, and have gotten off with the same thing. So the question is, what's going to happen? The answer to that, it seems like the same thing is going to happen in this case, that the cops are not going to be convicted, that that there might be backlash in the community, such as was in Baltimore and Ferguson. There might be some type of riot or whatnot. But essentially, after a while, what's going to happen is that everything's going to die out, and we're basically going to be complicit in our actions regarding this police violence. And everything will go to normal until we get another shocking, horrible story that comes in our timeline, and then the same cycle will start all over again. Now, this is what more than likely will happen, and this is what certainly will happen unless we learn a better way how we can address this issue. I personally think that fighting police brutality in itself without actually discussing the overall capitalistic system is meaningless. And the reason because of that is, if you understand the function of the police, their function is essentially to protect the property interest in the capital that was gained and taken by white society. Their role is to protect that and protect the society being inside of the place that it is in, which is whites on the top and blacks on the bottom. So anytime you see blacks do anything that is a possible threat to the white domination, the police force are essentially there to enforce the property rights and enforce the safety of the white population. That is why police also don't work equally as well for us as they do for others. Good example is, if you've seen the story, I forget the name of the woman, but the white woman who from Australia who was killed by a black officer who was Somali. And we've seen in this case that the justice system works well for the white woman and her family. The man is getting convicted, and not only is he, well, he's getting charged, but not only is he getting charged, but the police force is completely turning their back on their officer. This is something that we would never expect, because they never turn their back on their officer if the officer is guilty of killing someone who is black. But in this case, the police force completely turned their back on him and said, oh, you know, this is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And they were very direct with their words. And it looks like this black man will be convicted of killing this white woman. And so we see that the system is meant to work for one side, but it's not necessarily meant to work for the other side. So I'm saying all this to say that if we're not addressing the true issue of police brutality, and that is the structure of this society, that is that capital be kept by the people on the top, and that the people on the bottom have little access to these resources, and that in order to maintain this unbalanced system, you have a police force that's enforcing their right to maintain these resources, then if you don't address that overall system, I don't see how you could possibly lessen the impact of police brutality. Now, granted, if you actually think about what I'm saying that you have to actually address the overall capitalistic system to address police brutality, it's not an easy thing to do. And the easier thing to do, which is what I think why Black Lives Matters activists tend to do this, is to protest, is to do these die-ins or sit-ins or whatever, and do things that make you think that you're changing things in the moment. But the question is, are you actually changing things in the moment, or are you essentially doing things that are going to make you feel like you've done something, but actually in the long run not do anything in the long run? And I think that the evidence has shown that when it comes to the issue of police brutality, sit-ins, marches, that's not the type of thing that's going to address that particular issue. We have to understand also about the civil rights movement. There were different tactics that were used at different times. Marching was used in some instances. Sit-ins were used in some instances. Armed conflict was used in some instances. Everything, if it was done well, was very calculated. So whenever we have people marching and sitting in for police murders, my question is, what is your tactic? What is the end to this mean? Like, what is the means to this end? What is your perception of sitting in at a Starbucks? How is that going to affect people who are getting killed by the police over in the hood? Where's the calculation? And there is not a lot of calculation in how these protests happen, unfortunately, and I think that's why these things keep happening over and over again. But I'm not going to belabor this point. I'm just going to say that essentially it looks like this might be business as usual until we learn how to better address the issue of police brutality. And I hope that we can, and it's good that we are reacting in some way. It would be obviously concerning if we didn't react at all. But at the same time, if we're trying to actually see some rewards for our efforts and for our pain and for our organizing, we have to figure out a better way to address the issue of police brutality. So those are my thoughts on the unfortunate murder of Stephon Clark. I would love to know yours. You can leave your comments on the bottom, and I will see you in another video.